I will get the live stream started, and then I will be back shortly to go ahead and give you the all clear to get started.
All right, sounds good. I'm gonna go back into hiding for a second, and I'll pop back out when we get started.
All right, this room has the all clear to begin. Shane, I just wanted to make sure you're still here, correct? Oh. Shane, I am unable to hear you if you are speaking. Is it just me having that issue, or can anyone else hear him?
I also cannot hear him.
All right, go ahead and hold off starting this round. I'm going to just start the other 2 rounds, and then I'll come back and try and fix this. For the teams, don't worry, I won't let it affect your all lost time. You'll still get the full 2.5 hours.
All right, thanks.
All right, I'm on the phone with one of the judges, just trying to get him fixed back in. So I'll let you know when we're good to go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
All right. Okay, we're good.
All right.
Great.
This round is good to begin then. Thank you.
All right. 1 second. All right, now that we've been given the all clear, I'm going to call the case of the Estates of Genesis Petrillo versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. And my name is Allison Rapond, and I will be your presiding judge today. Scoring judges, if y'all can make sure to keep your audio and video off until we do comments at the end. Everyone should also have their video set to hide non-video participants. So ideally, you should only see me and the advocates on the screen. And now we'll go ahead and do appearances and take care of any pre-trial matters. Start with the plaintiff's counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Before we begin, I just want to make sure you can hear and see me okay?
I can.
Perfect. We have a few pretrial matters to attend to, but before that, may we introduce ourselves?
Yes, of course.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Danny Wassell, along with my co-counselors, Miss Emily O'Keefe
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
and Miss Lauren Peterson.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And together, we represent the plaintiff in today's case.
Right, and we'll go ahead and do defense introductions, and then we'll take care of pretrial from there if that works.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, defense, you may proceed with your introductions.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Josie Alawardi, and I, alongside with my co-counsels, Nicholas Hoffman,
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Gage Jones,
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
we will be representing the defendant, Harper Martini, in today's trial.
All right, perfect. Plaintiffs' counsel, I'll go ahead and turn to you for any pretrial matters we need to address.
Yes, Your Honor. There are actually a few housekeeping matters we want to address, as this is the first time in your courtroom. Would you like us to ask permission to share a screen for exhibits and demonstratives, or to just do so when necessary?
I would do so when necessary. The caveat I'll give on that is for exhibits that are not already admitted per the stipulations, we're going to go ahead and presume those are seen outside the presence of the jury unless and until they're admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. We also just want to verify at this time that you have all the necessary case materials for this morning's trial, such as the rules of evidence, case law, and stipulations with you.
I do, yes.
Yes. And at this time, the plaintiff would like to invoke Rule 603, which is the constructive pre-swearing of all witnesses prior to today's trial.
All witnesses will be considered pre-sworn.
Yes, Your Honor. We would also like to invoke Rule 615, which is the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives. And the plaintiff in today's case has no party representative.
Right. The rule is invoked for all witnesses except to the extent the defense has a party representative. I don't know if they're calling that particular witness or not, but if they are, that witness will be considered to be present in the courtroom.
Yes, Your Honor. We would also like to draw your attention to some relevant case law. The first is Burdett v. Capenhaver, which can be found on page 1 of the case law document. And this just discusses the 3 elements of the civil battery charge that we will be pursuing in today's case.
Great.
The second is Jacob v. Alexander, which can be found on the same page, and it explains that the contact necessary for a battery charge is not limited to the physical touch of the defendant.
Okay.
For example, a defendant who intentionally introduces an injurious substance into the food or drink of the plaintiff has committed battery, even though the plaintiff voluntarily consumed the said food or drink.
Understood.
And lastly, we would like to draw your attention to Stipulation 3 on page 1 of the stipulation document. And Stipulation 3 states that exhibits 1 through 10 are already pre-admitted into evidence and as such may be used and referenced at any point during today's trial.
Great. So noted.
And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed with opening statements.
Right. Defense, any additional housekeeping or pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. Per Rule 615, defense would like to designate Harper Martini as our party representative.
So designated.
And Your Honor, it's commonly assumed in this jurisdiction that all objections are constructively heard outside of the earshot of the jury. May we assume the same in your court?
Yes, of course.
And with that, Your Honor, Harper Martini is ready for trial.
All right, let's proceed with opening statements. I'm going to suggest that everyone switch to speaker view so you can just see the attorney that's speaking. Everyone else, please mute your audio when you are not speaking. And plaintiff will go ahead and proceed with your opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, I just want to make sure that you can hear and see me well.
I can, yes.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. She was intentional, she was angry, and she was finally in control. Members of the jury, we are here today because the defendant intended to and succeeded in ending the life of Genesis Petrillo. Today, my co-counsel and I are going to tell you about how a mother felt so strongly about her daughter's significant other that she took measures into her own hands. Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo were inseparable from the moment they met. They loved each other very much. Now, eventually, this love turned into an engagement and a promise to spend the rest of their lives together. But this promise was cut short. On June 8th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo passed away due to pesticide poisoning, and the evidence will show that the only one who could have been responsible was Harper Martini. Now, Mrs. Martini was the mother of Casey Soto, the soon-to-be bride. Throughout the couple's relationship, the defendant felt that Genesis Petrillo was tearing their family apart, and there was nothing she wouldn't do to stay close with her only child. Now, the defendant also ran her own winery, Peony Estates. The winery was located near a swamp, therefore she and her employees had difficulty controlling pests. Consequently, the winery resorted to pesticides, which would have been extremely easy for the defendant to gain access to. Members of the jury, it's simple. The defendant saw Mr. Petrillo not only as a threat to her business, Peony Estates, but to her relationship with her only child, Casey Soto. So she did the unthinkable to ensure that she could get her life back, so that she could get her control back. As the plaintiff, we bear the burden in today's case. We must prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant is liable for civil battery by proving 3 elements. The first, that there was an act committed by the defendant. The second, that this act intended to cause harm. And finally, that we as the plaintiff were in fact harmed. This simply means that after looking at the evidence, if you think that it is just more likely than not that the defendant wanted to harm Mr. Petrillo and that she followed through by poisoning him, you must find the defendant liable for civil battery. Now, in order to prove that the defendant is liable, we as the plaintiff are going to call 3 witnesses who will show you, members of the jury, exactly why the defendant is liable. First, you will hear from Casey Soto. Ms. Soto is not only the daughter of the defendant, but the fiance of the late Genesis Petrillo. She will tell the jury that she is here today to reveal the truth, even if that means testifying against her own mother. You will also hear from Dr. Kwan. Dr. Kwan is an expert in the field of toxicology who will provide information regarding Mr. Petrillo's condition leading up to his death, as well as the exact cause of his death, pesticide poisoning. Finally, Angel Rodriguez will come before you. Mr. Rodriguez was a close friend of the couple and will provide vital information regarding the timeline of the evening prior to June 8th, as well as incidents of Harper's unwavering hostility towards Genesis Petrillo. In a few moments, the defense will come before you and try and play this off as simply dislike. However, I urge you not to forget that we are here today because of the untimely death of Mr. Petrillo, and that justice must be administered. At the end of today's trial, my co-counselor, Lauren Peterson, will come before you and ask you to find the defendant liable for civil battery because she was intentional, she was angry, and she was finally in control. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. A defense, you can proceed with your opening statement.
May it please the court. Harper Martini had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Members of the jury, Miss O'Keefe just came up here and told you a story of intrigue, secrets, betrayal, anger. But members of the jury, I want you to listen to what the plaintiff actually wants you to believe. You're going to hear a lot of mean words, a lot of out of context quotes, maybe a little bit of circumstantial evidence. What you're never going to hear is that evidence that Harper Martini killed anyone, because Harper Martini had everything to lose and nothing to gain. So let's talk about the real story of today's case. Miss Martini is a loving mother who wants nothing but the best for her daughter, Casey Soto. You'll hear how Miss Martini plays a large role in the wedding between Miss Soto and Mr. Petrillo, and how she actually tries to make peace with Mr. Petrillo on the night of the wedding rehearsal. She gives a beautiful toast and offers him a customized bottle of wine. Members of the jury, that's when a tragic accident occurs. Unfortunately, we know now that bottle of wine was contaminated with pesticide. And when Mr. Petrillo drank it, he fell ill and passed away. This is where the plaintiff's story shifts from fact to fiction. Members of the jury, you'll hear that it's simply impossible that the plaintiff's story could have happened. Somebody would have had to open the wine bottle, uncork it, poison it, and then reseal it through a long, complicated process without being noticed. Members of the jury, you're going to hear that it's simply much more likely that the wine bottle was contaminated during the wine production process. Now today, the plaintiff has brought a claim of battery. Because they brought that claim, they hold the burden of proof. Their burden starts, stops, and stays with them. We don't have to prove a single thing. Their burden requires that they prove their case by a preponderance of the evidence, which just means more likely than not. Now, Ms. O'Keefe said that it just means more likely than not, and they just have to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence. Members of the jury, I want you to realize, more likely than not means more likely than all of the other possible alternatives combined. And to prove battery, the plaintiff has to show three things. First, they have to show an act by Miss Martini. Second, they have to show that she did that act with the intent to harm Genesis Petrillo. And third, they have to show that Miss Martini's act actually harmed Genesis Petrillo. Members of the jury, the plaintiff will be unable to prove any of these elements. Listen to their story. Look through their out of context quotes, their mean words. Look at the facts, members of the jury. They want you to believe that Miss Martini would sacrifice her business, her relationship with her child, her life as she knew it, all over some mean words? Members of the jury, the truth is, Harper Martini had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. And before we get started with the respective cases in chief, can I just confirm with my scoring judges that they have access to their ballots? If y'all could just confirm that for me real quick.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes.
Shane, do you? Okay, you have access. Great. Just wanted to double check that. Forgot to do that at the beginning. All right. Well, we're going to now proceed with the plaintiff's case in chief. The best way to view that is going to be through gallery view. You can switch that through the upper right of your screen, and that will allow you to see the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time. Plaintiff's counsel, you can call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Miss Casey Soto to the stand. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Casey Soto.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you're here today?
Yeah, my fiance Genesis died of pesticide poisoning and is no longer here with us. And unfortunately, my mom, Harper Martini, is actually accused of intentionally poisoning Genesis.
Now, let's start from the beginning. When did you first meet Genesis Petrillo?
We met at a party at Rosie and Pedro Winery in 2012. My friend Drew invited me to party with a bunch of his buddies, and out of all the crowd, Genesis instantly caught my attention, and we hit it off.
And how did that relationship develop?
As cliche as it may sound, we fell in love, which was honestly something I never thought would happen to me, because
I'm usually pretty shy, especially around guys, but around Genesis, I was a completely different person. He made me feel like myself, you know, and Genesis got along with everyone except my mom.
Now, I actually want to talk about the relationship between Genesis and the defendant. What was that like?
Rocky from the beginning. You know, my mom was all I had until Genesis, and I wanted them to get along, but when they met, things couldn't have gotten any worse. You see, my mom offered Genesis some wine, and Genesis, not knowing that my mom actually owned the winery, asked for something classier, like the wine at Rose and Pedro Winery.
Objection, Your
And-
Honor. These statements are hearsay. They're out-of-court statements being offered for the truth of the matter. Any statements said by Genesis may not be admitted as their hearsay.
May I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, the quote was Genesis had asked for something classier. There's no truth value to a question. Therefore, they're not hearsay.
I'm going to sustain the objection, and I'm going to strike the question, because I think a question is still a statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Soto, I'm going to repeat the question for you. What was that like?
It was rocky. I just wanted them to get along, but things just went downhill after they first met.
And how did that affect your relationship?
Well, at first it was pretty manageable, but once we announced our engagement, things took a turn for the worse. The bickering was almost never ending, and it was so stressful always being stuck in the middle of all their arguments. I just wanted the two most important people in my life to get along, you know?
And you mentioned that things that took a turn for the worst. Could you expand on that a little?
Well, originally, Genesis and I were set on having our wedding at Rose and Pedro before we first met. But once my mom got involved, she told me she wanted to have the wedding at her own winery, Peony Estates. After that, she took the front seat in planning the wedding, and because of this, Genesis and my mom were constantly butting heads.
And did you decide to have the wedding at Peony Estates?
It definitely wasn't our first choice, but my mom did offer to pay for most of the wedding expenses if we had the wedding there, which seemed like a pretty fair deal to me. And at first, Genesis was pretty hesitant to accept, but we figured the money not used for the wedding could be sent to France. Genesis had actually gotten a job offer there.
And how did things progress from there?
Things were pretty tense, and they only got worse after the pre-wedding party at the Blackbird Casino.
What do you mean by that?
Genesis got drunk and let the cat out of the bag that we were moving to France. Next thing I knew, I heard my mom yelling at Genesis that you'd better reconsider your plans. Casey had to stay in Midland, whether you stay with Casey, move off to France, or end up 6 feet under.
Now, I actually want to talk about the rehearsal on June 7th specifically. What happened that afternoon?
Things started off rough from the get-go. My mom was immediately snapping at Genesis, so I went to my mom pretty upset about all the drama, and all she said was, the only thing you need to do is give me the word and I'll cancel this whole thing. And I still didn't really know what she meant by that.
And what happened that night at the rehearsal dinner?
Things seemed pretty normal. My mom even came out later that evening with what seemed like a grand gesture by giving Genesis a really nice bottle of wine. She kept insisting, this is for you.
And did anything else happen that night?
Not really. I saw Genesis pouring a couple glasses of wine, but I was getting pretty tired, so I called it a night, gave him a kiss, and went to bed. I just wish I knew that was our last kiss, or even the last time I'd seen him.
And Miss Soto, what happened that next day?
It was supposed to be the best day of my life, my wedding day, but instead it was the worst. I found out Genesis had slipped into a coma, so I rushed her to the hospital. I was 5 minutes too late. After that, everything was a blur. I just remember the doctor giving some kind of medical diagnosis that Genesis had died with some kind of poisoning, possibly pesticide poisoning. And Peony Estates was the first thing to come to mind, and I just didn't understand.
Ms. Soto, what did you not understand?
I ate and drank all the same things as Genesis, except for the wine that my mom gave to him.
How is your relationship with the defendant today?
I haven't really spoken to my mom. I just need to get away from all this, so I moved to France anyways, to live out our dream for the both of us.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination,
Yes, Your Honor.
you can proceed.
Ms. Soto, I'd like to start off by asking you a couple of questions about the wedding planning process. Now, you said on direct that you originally wanted to have your wedding at a completely different winery.
Yes, because it's where we first met, so it was special to us.
Right, and it was once you talked with your mother that she convinced you to change your wedding venue to Peony Estates.
Yeah, I mean, she offered to pay for most of it, so, I mean, who wouldn't change?
Right, Ms. Soto, but that wasn't the only reason why you changed your venue.
No, I suppose not.
Your mother told you that it was always her dream for you to have your wedding at her own venue.
Objection, Your Honor, to the statements of the defendant, Ms. Martini.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor, this statement isn't being offered for truth of the matter. It's rather being offered for effect it had on the listener, Ms. Soto. Upon hearing these statements from her mother, she decided to change the venue, making it subsequent action and an exception to hearsay.
Your response?
Yes, Your Honor. If indeed it is going towards the effect on the listener, I ask that the line of questioning be limited to exactly that, and that the statement not be elicited if it's not for the truth of the matter.
Okay, I will overrule your objection to the extent that this testimony is offered for the effect on the listener. Also give an instruction to the jury that this testimony is not offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but is rather for the effect that it had on Ms. Soto.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Soto, I'll re-ask my question. So your mother told you that it was always her dream to host your wedding at her own venue.
Yes, she did.
But your mother also confided in you that her business was struggling.
Yeah, something
Objection,
about a
Your
failed
Honor.
inspection.
Again, to the hearsay statements of Ms. Martini.
Is your response, counsel?
Once more, Your Honor, this is subsequent action. It goes to Ms. Soto moving her wedding from the Rosine Pedro to Peony Estates. But furthermore, this is a rationally based upon the witness's perception, as Casey Soto has worked at Peony Estates before, and this is also her mother. She would be made aware of the financial state of Peony Estates.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I think there's a way you could potentially rephrase your question to get around the concern, but I'll sustain the objection as to what Ms. Martini said specifically.
Yes,
Your Honor. May I strike the question?
Yes, the question's stricken.
Thank you.
Ms. Soto, you moved your wedding to Peony Estates partly to be used as advertising for Peony Estates' winery. Isn't that right?
Yeah, something about a failed inspection.
Ms. Soto, maybe you misheard my question. Your wedding was going to be used as advertisement to help Peony Estates' business.
Yes.
Ms. Soto, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions now about the night of the dinner rehearsal. Now, around 10 p.m., your mother gave a speech.
Yes, she did.
She stood up in front of all of the wedding guests.
That is correct.
She grabbed a microphone.
Yes.
And she pulled your fiance, Genesis, to the front of the room in front of all the guests.
Yes, she did.
And she spoke into this microphone saying, "This bottle is for you, Genesis."
Objection, Your Honor, to the hearsay statements of Ms. Martini.
Your Honor.
Is your response?
Yes, Your Honor. This statement was already elicited on the direct. It's already been entered into this statement has already been admitted into evidence by the prosecution.
Is that true, plaintiff's counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, by my witness, correct.
All right, then I'm going to overrule your objection. You can proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Soto, I'll ask my question once more. Your mother spoke into the microphone and said, "This bottle is just for you, Genesis.
Yeah, it was kind of weird since she gave like an uglier speech earlier, but I was pretty happy about it.
Yeah, and she handed this bottle of Cara wine to your fiance.
That is correct. She gave it to Genesis.
And she made sure everyone in the audience knew that this bottle was a unique Cara, unlike the other Horizon bottles that other people were given.
Yes, she made the differentiation.
When your fiance took the bottle, he poured a couple glasses, like you said.
Yes, I only saw him drink one though, because as I said, I went to bed.
Right, but you didn't see your mother hovering around the table.
No,
You didn't see her stop Genesis from drinking that wine.
no, I did not.
You didn't see your mother stop Genesis from pouring 2 glasses, potentially one for another guest.
No,
You didn't see any of that, Miss Soto.
no. As I said, I went to bed early, so I didn't see much.
Miss Soto, I'd like to ask a couple of questions about your relationship with your mother. Now, growing up, it was just you and Miss Martini.
Yeah, that's right. She's my only parent.
She took you to every soccer practice.
Yes,
She took you to every school play.
yes,
And even when you went to college, your mother would find any excuse to come and visit you.
yeah. She showed up unannounced, even when I was busy, always asking a whole bunch of questions.
But Miss Soto, you knew your mother did this because she loves you.
Yes, I would hope so.
Miss Soto, you know that you mean the world to your mother.
Yes,
Objection, Your Honor, to improper character evidence. May I be heard?
Yes.
Counsel is laying foundation for certain characteristics that Miss Martini loves her daughter and would never hurt her, and is using that precedent to explain why she would never intentionally harm her, which is the whole point of today's case.
To response, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm just laying foundation to establish Miss Martini's relationship with Miss Soto, her daughter, after the incident occurred. I'm not trying to use any character evidence under Rule 404. Furthermore, Your Honor, Rule 404 has an extremely low bar, so were I to be offering this evidence, it has a low bar.
May I respond?
Yes, briefly.
Opposing counsel says she was using this to establish the relationship between Miss Soto and her mother after the incident. All of the questions that she has previously asked have been before the incident about her growing up with Miss Martini, which isn't relevant to the relationship now.
Your Honor, briefly, I'm merely trying to offer contrast between Miss Soto's relationship with her mother before the incident and after the incident. I was about to go into that questioning until opposing counsel objected.
I'll overrule the objection for now.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Miss Soto, you haven't spoken to your mother since Genesis Petrio's funeral.
no, I haven't. I just honestly don't really trust her anymore.
Miss Soto, that was over a year ago.
Yes, it was.
Miss Soto, you know your mother loves her winery.
Yes,
You know your mother loves you.
yes, but that doesn't change what she may have done now.
Miss Soto, despite all that, you still think it's possible your mother killed your fiance?
Well, I have no way of knowing for sure, but yes, I do think so.
I pass the witness.
All right. Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that the witness be able to step down.
All right. The witness may step down and you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Dr. Kwan to the stand.
You can proceed.
Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yeah, hi there. My name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
And what is it that you do for a living, Dr. Kwan?
Well, I'm currently the chief emergency physician at River Valley Hospital here in Midlands, and I've held this particular position since 2015, but have worked as an emergency room physician since 2003.
And what sort of education have you received in order to hold this position?
I received my BS in biology with a minor in chemistry at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and I then got my MD at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I completed my residency at Emory's Department of Emergency Medicine and also completed a fellowship in medical toxicology while I was there.
And do you have any other qualifications?
I'm currently on the board of directors of Doctors for Organic Solutions, which is a group that advocates against the use of some of the more harmful chemical pesticides since they present an immense and needless danger to the environment and humans.
So, Dr. Kwan, have you ever been published in your field?
I have, yes. I've actually written several articles for my specific field of toxicology and emergency medicine. One of my best known is, "Don't you know that you're toxic? Differential diagnosis in poisoning cases."
So, moving to today's case, what's your involvement?
I was actually asked by both parties to prepare a report regarding the death of a patient named Genesis Petrillo, as I was a doctor who administered his treatment on the morning of June 8th, 2019.
And what sort of materials did you rely on to come to your conclusions?
Well, I was the person who examined Mr. Petrillo on the night in question, but I also reviewed all relevant exhibits regarding his lab reports, as well as the affidavit of an Angel Rodriguez, who was actually the friend who brought him in that night.
And were these materials sufficient for you?
Yes, they were more than enough to come to a conclusion with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, especially since I was also able to treat Mr. Petrillo for his symptoms.
So, what sort of method did you use in your examination and your treatment of Mr. Petrillo?
I used what we call the PET method, which stands for preliminary interview, examination, and testing.
Is this reliable in your field?
Absolutely. This is the gold standard in my field and should be followed by any doctor in order to come to accurate conclusions.
And did you reliably apply this method in today's case?
Of course, just as I would in any other case.
Okay, so I would like to start talking about that first component, the preliminary interview. How did that go?
It wasn't easy. I first encountered Mr. Petrillo as he was being brought into the hospital by EMTs, and he had some trouble responding to my questions regarding his symptoms. So I asked him what questions I could, but also interviewed the friend who accompanied him, Angel Rodriguez.
So, what did you learn from your interview of Mr. Petrillo?
Like I said, Mr. Petrillo was not able to answer all my questions, but was able to convey that he was experiencing stomach cramps and chest pains. He said that he'd been drinking wine that evening, which was corroborated by his vomit contents, which I took later.
And then what did you learn from Mr. Rodriguez?
I learned that Mr. Petrillo had indeed been drinking at a party earlier and later started exhibiting symptoms of nausea and vomiting. This then led to Mr. Rodriguez calling EMTs to get Mr. Petrillo help.
So, with this information, what did you do next?
After interviewing both Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Petrillo, I conducted a quick examination of Mr. Petrillo. I found his breathing to be slower than normal, which is also indicative to alcohol consumption. So with this information, I admitted Mr. Petrillo on the belief that this was another alcohol poisoning case.
So then, moving to the examination part of the PET method, what did you learn during this stage?
I performed a complete examination, and throughout this process, there were actually a few key findings that made it clear he was experiencing something far more severe than alcohol poisoning.
What made you think this?
There were three main indicators. His pupils were severely contracted. He was experiencing involuntary muscle twitching, and his pulse was slowed. These symptoms are actually the opposite of what an alcohol poisoning case generally looks like.
So, what are these symptoms indicative of?
All three of these symptoms are present in organophosphate poisoning cases.
Okay, so let's go back to the examination part in a second, but for those of us who aren't experts, what is organophosphate pesticide poisoning?
Yeah, so organophosphates are a kind of chemical compound that are commonly used in insecticides, pardon me. Saying organophosphate poisoning is essentially a fancier way of saying pesticide poisoning. However, organophosphates are extremely dangerous when humans come into contact with them.
What happens if humans do come into contact with them?
The introduction of organophosphates into the body inhibits the production of this enzyme called acetylcholinesterase, or ACE for short. In turn, this limited production can cause the nervous system to prevent muscles from ever relaxing until eventually the person in question stops breathing and dies.
So then going back to the examination, with this in mind, how did you proceed?
Well, after viewing those symptoms, I started to believe that rather than a case of alcohol poisoning, I was actually looking at a case of pesticide poisoning, which is far more severe.
And then on to the last method, the last component of the PET method, what testing did you run?
I had initially ordered a poisons and toxins analysis to be conducted, but once I began to suspect that this was a pesticide poisoning case, I also ordered an ACE test. In cases in which an organophosphate has been ingested, ACE levels are lower than you would normally see.
And when did you get these results back?
I didn't get these results back while Mr. Petrillo was still with me. However, since all symptoms pointed to a sign of pesticide poisoning, I did begin administering the antidote for organophosphate exposure at that point.
Why did you go ahead and administer the antidote without confirmation from the test results?
In my experience, organophosphate poisoning progresses quickly and severely. If I was right, then Mr. Petrillo was exhibiting symptoms that indicated he was near death. If I wanted to save his life, my absolute best bet was to administer the antidote right away.
Did the antidote work?
No. Unfortunately, I was too late in this case. Mr. Petrillo began to cough and seize, and he fell into a coma from which he did not wake up. I had to call his death on the morning of June 8th, 2019, and it wasn't until after this I received the lab results, which did in fact confirm my suspicions.
Can you tell us what those results reflected?
They confirmed that Mr. Petrillo's case had been one of pesticide poisoning, not alcohol poisoning, for a couple reasons, namely the poisons and toxins test results and the ACE test results.
Dr. Kwan, would you recognize the poisons and toxins analysis if it were shown to you in court today?
Yes, absolutely.
Ms. Wassell, would you please share Exhibit 6 to the screen at this time?
Yes, let me know if you can see it.
We cannot. There we go. So, Dr. Kwan, how did these test results confirm that it was a case of pesticide poisoning?
Yes, so as you can see, it does state that organophosphates were found in Mr. Petrillo's system. If you scroll down a bit. Yes, and then right below in the subsequent sampling of his vomit listed there, it was determined that his stomach contents did contain the pesticide. Now, none of the other food samples from Peony Estates contained organophosphates, which means it is nearly certain that the wine was the source of the pesticide.
And Dr. Kwan, would you also recognize the ACE test results if they were shown to you today?
I would, yes.
Ms. Wassell, would you switch to Exhibit 5? And then how did these test results also confirm that it was in fact pesticide poisoning?
They helped me confirm this for a couple reasons. If you look at the ACE levels that are listed and the blood alcohol content, which is a little bit farther down. Yeah, so the ACE level was proven to be low, which is, again, one of the telltale signs of pesticide poisoning. And then the blood alcohol content, or BAC percentage, is listed as 0.16%, which further confirmed that it was a case of pesticide poisoning and not alcohol poisoning.
How did you factor these BAC results into your conclusion?
While a BAC of 0.16% definitely reflects that a person has been drinking, it cannot account for all the serious symptoms that Mr. Petrillo exhibited. A much higher BAC would have been needed in order for alcohol to be the sole cause of those symptoms.
So, Dr. Kwan, what is your ultimate conclusion on Mr. Petrillo's cause of death?
Based on all the evidence and my own personal examination of Mr. Petrillo, I can conclude to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Mr. Petrillo ingested wine contaminated with an organophosphate pesticide, and this pesticide is what ultimately caused his death.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
You can proceed.
Hi, Dr. Kwan. Just want to make sure, can you hear and see me okay?
I can, yes.
All right, Dr. Kwan. I just want to clarify some things about your conclusion. We can agree that Genesis Petrillo probably died from pesticide poisoning, right?
Yes, that's correct.
We can also agree that the pesticide was probably the pesticide probably entered into Mr. Petrillo's system via wine, correct?
Almost certainly correct.
Beyond that, we don't really know much about what happened to Mr. Petrillo, do we?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean.
Well, Dr. Kwan, we don't know how that pesticide got into the wine, do we?
No, I cannot say how that would have occurred.
We don't know if maybe it was the grapes that turned into the wine that were contaminated with pesticides, right?
As I said, I'm not sure. However, based on my results, I do know that it was most likely the wine that was the cause of the organophosphates in Mr. Petrillo's system.
Yes, but let's be clear. Your results can't tell us when the pesticide entered the wine, isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Your results also can't tell us how much pesticide Mr. Petrillo ingested, isn't that true?
Yes, at this point in time, the best way to measure any sort of consumption is through the ACE results, which I did conduct.
Dr. Kwan, you mentioned on direct examination that you're on the board of Doctors for Organic Solutions, right?
I am, that's correct.
That's because chemical pesticides are extremely dangerous, isn't that true?
They are.
They pose a major risk to public health.
They can if not used correctly, that's true.
You think that they should be banned outright.
I do think that it would be safer if they were used less, if more restrictions were imposed, or if they were banned, yes.
So you think it's unsafe for businesses to use chemical pesticides, right?
I would advise against it because of the health hazards that can come with it, but I'm sure in correct amounts, it's probably fine. It depends.
Well, Dr. Kwan, you want it to be banned outright, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's one of the options I would advocate for. But like I said, harder restrictions or something along those lines would also be sufficient, in my opinion.
Well, and Dr. Kwan, you also think that businesses that are using chemical pesticides are putting their customers at risk.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
First, Your Honor, Rule 401 has an extremely low bar. All my question has to show is that a piece of evidence has a tendency to make another fact more or less probable. Your Honor, in this case, Genesis Petrillo died because of pesticide poisoning. And that pesticide may have entered the wine that Mr. Petrillo drank by accident. It could have entered the wine through the production process. It could have entered the wine while there was an empty wine bottle sitting out in the bottling area. It could have happened at any point in the production process. I'm exploring how dangerous it is to have chemical pesticides around the wine production process. And that makes it more likely that Genesis Petrillo's death was a tragic accident.
Response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan is a medical doctor, and she has been called today to testify on Mr. Petrillo's cause of death, as she was the attending physician. She's not a chemist. She's not a pesticide expert. She cannot testify as to the safe practices of pesticide usage.
Your Honor, this is now opposing counsel is shifting. Excuse me.
You're good. I'm going to overrule the objection, so you can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, you think that businesses that use chemical pesticides are putting their customers at risk.
I do believe that usage should be curtailed. I would caution against it. Again, I'm sure if regulations were followed, then it would be okay.
You would be concerned about a business that has to use an above average amount of pesticides in the course of their practice.
I mean, I guess I've never had to use pesticides for anything, but I suppose the implication of saying above average would not insinuate anything good.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor. I just ask that at this time, Dr. Kwan be allowed to step down.
The witness may step down and you may call your final witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls Mr. Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
Right. You can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Of course, my name is Angel Rodriguez.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm 26 years old and I work as an elementary school teacher at Rapid River Elementary. It's an exercise in patience, sure, but I get summer breaks off and the job is really fulfilling. When I'm not working, I usually hang out with my best friends, Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo.
How did you meet Mr. Petrillo and Miss Soto?
Well, we met at a trivia bar for a history trivia night, sports bar, and we just sort of clicked. The three of us became best friends, and we spent nearly every hour together after that. And then Casey and Genesis were basically dating the whole time, but I never felt like a third wheel. And then Genesis proposed to Casey, and they were engaged, and I was super excited about the whole thing.
Now, what happened after Mr. Petrillo proposed?
Well, they decided to have their wedding at Rosie and Pedro's winery, which is a good choice if you ask me. And we planned the whole wedding out, from the flowers to the decorations to all the itty bitty details. And things were pretty perfect until Casey's father got involved.
You mentioned how things changed when the defendant became involved. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, Harper's like the kid who tells everyone else on the playground what to do. Even though Genesis and Casey were, the people getting married, Harper decided that the wedding should happen at Peony Estates. And I was confused as to why she wanted so much control over someone else's wedding. This was in 2018, but even into 2019, things kept going downhill.
Mr. Rodriguez, what do you mean by headed downhill?
Well, changing the wedding plan, it's annoying, but it's nothing to pick a bone with. But it didn't stop there. Harper would throw some pointed jabs at Genesis. Genesis took them all personally, and Casey was stuck between a rock and a hard place trying to pick between the two of them. And then Genesis and Casey would argue, and this went on and on and on, even up until the wedding rehearsal.
I actually want to talk about the night of the wedding rehearsal. When was that?
Well, it was in early June. It wasn't a good day, and I kind of feel selfish for saying that because the people who really suffered were Genesis and Casey.
What happened that evening?
Well, it didn't start off on a good note. Harper and Genesis were arguing about everything from the napkins to the vows. I mean, my kindergartners fight less than they do.
What happened?
Well, things got heated, and Harper didn't play nice. She said if Genesis didn't leave, he'd make her disappear. And then she grabbed Genesis by the arm and pulled her into a hallway. I don't know what she told Genesis there, but what Genesis told me afterward, it scared the daylight out of me.
What did Mr. Petrillo tell you?
Objection, Your Honor. This question calls for hearsay.
Your response, counsel?
The statement that Angel Rodriguez is about to deliver is a statement about Genesis being scared about the conversation that Genesis had with Harper Martini. Under Rule 8033, this would be an exception to hearsay under the then existing mental condition. Genesis obviously is afraid. Genesis is scared about what the defendant is potentially planning to do. Therefore, I would argue that this is an exception to hearsay.
Your response?
Yes, Your Honor. This witness can't lay sufficient foundation to qualify this statement under Rule 8033. In order to qualify under Rule 8033, this statement must be professing a then exempting mental or emotional state. If the statement was just, I'm afraid, and that's all this witness is going to be said, that would be allowed. But in opposing counsel's response, she mentioned a lot of implication about what Harper Martini may have been planning to do. If they go into those specific statements, those don't qualify under Rule 8033 as an exception to hearsay.
Why don't we see what the witness is going to say? And then if the witness does say something as you've addressed in your concerns, we'll take it up again after we hear the witness's statement. If it truly is just going to be, like you said, Genesis was afraid and that's it, I think that does fall under the exception cited. So let's see what the witness has to say, and then we can always address that on the back end if it exceeds that. So I'll overrule the objection for now.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Rodriguez, I'll ask the question again. What happened?
Well, after Genesis walked back out, she came to me and she said, keep away from Harper. I'm afraid Harper's going to kill me if I'm not careful.
Your Honor, to hearsay.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to sustain the objection, strike the testimony.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Rodriguez, you mentioned that later in the evening you ran into the defendant. What happened?
Well, she was walking around with a can of pesticide indoors, and I thought it was a bit funny, so I just asked her what's up.
Your Honor, to lack of personal knowledge as to whether or not that was a can of pesticide, the only way this witness would know if that was a can of pesticide is if he read the label, which, if that's the case, that would be hearsay, as Midlands has no residual exceptions for circumstantial trustworthiness.
Response, counsel.
Your Honor, Mr. Rodriguez was right there near Mrs. Martini when he ran into her. Typically, I would say if someone is holding a canister of pesticide, it is obvious that it is a canister of pesticide. This is obviously something that was in their rationally based perception of what they could see.
I agree. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Rodriguez, when was the next time you saw the defendant?
Again, it was right before the dinner for the wedding rehearsal, and he was walking around with a can of pesticides, and I asked him what it was for.
And did the defendant then later gave a speech?
Yes, he did. He basically tried to give a speech after Genesis's, which was very sweet, but he kept calling Genesis a problem child, like again and again. First off, never call someone a problem child. I did that at a PTA conference once. It didn't go very well. Second, if that was Harper's attempt at humor, Genesis didn't take it very well.
Can you elaborate a little bit more, Mr. Rodriguez, on Mr. Petrio's reaction?
Yeah, Genesis has a very predictable response to things she doesn't like. Drinking. Lots of drinking, but she didn't
Your Honor, at this time, I'd have to object to improper character evidence, saying that Mr. Petrio had a very particular response to things that he didn't like, and then resorted to drinking would be using previous actions to prove conformity therewith. I must object to improper character evidence at this time.
Your response, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Directly after these statements about Mr. Petrio drinking a lot, the witness will then say that Mr. Petrio did not drink as much this evening. Therefore, this is not character evidence because we as the plaintiff are not building this up to try to prove anything. We are actually trying to prove that this was somewhat of an odd behavior. This is not a trait or any sort of conformity.
In that case, Your Honor, I'd raise an objection to relevance of this testimony if they're not using it to prove action and conformity therewith.
I'm going to overrule the relevance objection and the character evidence objection. I have other concerns, but it has not been raised at this point.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Rodriguez, once again, can you elaborate a little bit more on Mr. Petrio's reaction?
Yeah, Genesis looked very scared, and usually when she drinks, but she didn't drink much of anything that night, except a couple sips of champagne, and only from the bottle that Harper gave her.
Can you explain a little bit more about this wine that the defendant gifted Mr. Petrio?
Yeah, Harper gave Genesis a fancy-looking bottle of Cara wine, while the rest of us got one called Horizon, and she made a pretty big deal to say that it was specifically for Genesis.
What happened after Mr. Petrio drank this wine?
Well, the rehearsal ended soon after, and Casey went to bed. She's a lightweight. And Genesis and I stayed at the bar for a while. Then he started drinking, but only from the bottle that Harper gave him. And around 11, I started to get a little worried. I felt something was wrong.
Why were you worried?
Well, he was getting dizzy and he wasn't coordinated, which is normal after a few drinks, I guess. But then he basically collapsed.
What happened next?
I dragged him back to his room somehow, but he was looking worse and worse by the minute. I mean, he couldn't even drink water without throwing it back up. He was panting, he was sweating, and he was passed out cold on the bathroom floor calling for 911. I called the paramedics and we followed him to the hospital right away.
Mr. Rodriguez, what happened in the hospital?
It's hard for me to even remember, but I was watching my best friend die, and The doctor told me that Genesis had slipped into a coma and I needed to tell Casey, so I ran back to Peony Estates.
What happened when you arrived back at Peony Estates?
I ran into Harper and I didn't even open my mouth, and she says, Genesis got poisoned. Oh no, we'll have to cancel the whole wedding.
Now, how did the defendant know what happened to Mr. Petrillo?
Objection, Your Honor, lack of personal knowledge. This witness doesn't have comprehensive knowledge of how Miss Martini spent her evening. He doesn't know if Miss Martini got a phone call from the hospital because someone from her winery was taken to the hospital. Asking this witness this calls for a lack of personal knowledge under Rule 602.
What is your response?
Yes, Your Honor. In a few moments, the witness is actually going to reveal that they have actually no idea how the defendant knew this information. Therefore, I would argue that this is not speculation because once again, there is no speculation being involved because the witness is going to respond with evidence that says there is no special knowledge being elicited.
Remind me of what your question was.
The question was, how did Harper know what happened to Mr. Petrillo?
If that's going to be the witness's answer, that I don't like the way the question's phrased, but I think you've alleviated my concern, so I'm going to overrule the objection. But to the extent the witness is going to try to say what Harper Martini did or did not know, I'm going to have an issue with that, just so I'm
Yes, Your Honor.
clear.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rodriguez, once again, how did the defendant know what happened to Mr. Petrillo?
I don't know. I never told Harper that Genesis was poisoned or even in the hospital that night. I don't know anyone else who could have. It's like she already knew or something.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculating as to whether or not it was like Harper already knew is clearly improper.
Response, counsel.
Once again, I'm just going to argue that the witness did not know, obviously, based on the rationally based perception, knowing that the witness, Angel Rodriguez, did not notify Harper, and anyone else who was there at the hospital did not notify the defendant. Based on the rationally based perception of Mr. Rodriguez, he could obviously know that the defendant probably knew something more.
I'm going to sustain the speculation objection as to the last bit of testimony. It was like Harper knew already, and I'm going to strike that testimony from the record.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Rodriguez, what happened next?
You know how hard it is to tell your best friend that her husband is dying on the day that they were supposed to be married? Do you know how hard Casey cried that night? Because I do. We were 5 minutes too late. 5 minutes. We never even got to say goodbye.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
All right, at cross-examination,
Yes, Your Honor.
you can proceed.
Mr. Rodriguez, like you mentioned on direct examination, Miss Martini was involved with planning a lot of the wedding.
Yeah, she changed the wedding venue to Peony Estates.
Now, you know that it's not abnormal for a mother to be involved with her only child's wedding, right?
Right, but they planned the wedding somewhere else, and Harper wanted to change it for some reason, even though they didn't.
All right, Mr. Rodriguez, I actually want to talk about the dinner rehearsal itself. Now, you actually, like you mentioned on direct, ran into Harper before the dinner rehearsal, right?
Right, she was walking around with a can of pesticides, so I just asked her what was up.
Now, you don't actually know what that can of pesticides may have been used for.
Well, she said it was for Genesis because Genesis was a pest.
Mr. Rodriguez, to be clear, you knew she was joking.
I mean, especially after what Genesis told me earlier, I was scared at first. That wasn't a very funny joke.
But to be clear, Mr. Rodriguez, you did think it was a joke.
A bad joke, yeah.
So to be clear, you don't actually know what those pesticides may have been used for.
No, I didn't see Harper for after a while.
You don't know if it was used to kill some cockroaches.
No, I didn't follow Harper after that.
In fact, you don't know a lot about the pesticides protocols that Peony Estates follows, do you?
No, I don't work there. I'm an elementary
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge. The defense attorney is asking the witness knowledge about Peony Estates and their pesticide practices. This witness would have absolutely no knowledge of this.
To response, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor, that's precisely the point. I'm exploring the lack of knowledge this witness has as to how Peony Estates actually handles their pesticides. This is going into this witness's credibility and to the extent that they can testify accurately about the night in question. I'll later go on to explore why he blames Harper Martini and Peony Estates, despite his lack of knowledge in certain areas.
I agree. I think the question is one where the witness, if they don't know, can say as much. So I'm going to overrule the objection for now.
So,
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Rodriguez, like I was saying, you don't really know much about the pesticide protocols that Peony Estates follows.
No, I'm a kindergarten teacher. I don't work there.
Right? You don't know if they were having pest problems at the time of the wedding?
No, I never asked anyone about that.
Well, you did actually find out that they had done a pesticide spraying just a couple of days before the wedding rehearsal, right?
Yes, but I'm not sure what that process or procedure is too much. I don't work there.
Right? You can't tell us much about it.
Not quite.
Now, you can tell us a little bit about that Cara bottle of wine that you mentioned on direct, right?
Right, the one that Harper gave to Genesis.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit more. Now, Genesis actually shared that wine a little bit with you, didn't he?
Yes, I spit it right back out. It didn't taste very good, but only Genesis drank from it.
But to be clear, when Mr. Petrillo offered you that wine, Miss Martini didn't come over and smack it out of your hand.
No, I'm not even sure if she was watching.
Right, Miss Martini wasn't watching to make sure that no one else had any of that Cara bottle of wine, was she?
No, she just said that it was only for Genesis, and she sort of walked away.
So, to be clear, she wasn't stopping Genesis from sharing it with anyone.
No, not that I can remember.
I actually want to talk a little bit about why you're here today. You believe that Harper Martini is responsible for Genesis Petrillo's death.
If not for that, then at least for not doing anything about it.
Well, actually,
it's her daughter's fiance, and it still hurts me.
Maybe my question was a little unclear, Mr. Rodriguez, but you blame Harper Martini for Genesis Petrillo's death.
Yes.
In fact, you've spent as much time as possible trying to bring Harper Martini to justice.
I did.
You've met with lawyers.
I have.
You've met with policemen.
I tried to do what was possible to know why Genesis was taken from me so early. No one wanted to find out, it felt like, except for me. I wanted to know the truth.
Mr. Rodriguez, to be clear, you were meeting these people to try and bring Harper Martini to justice. Isn't that right?
I was meeting these people to find out what killed my best friend.
Mr. Rodriguez, is it your testimony that you weren't meeting these people in order to bring Harper Martini to justice?
That's not what I said. I met them, yes, to find out that too.
Apologies, Mr. Rodriguez. Just to be crystal clear, the purpose of you meeting these people was to bring Miss Martini to justice. Isn't that right?
Yes, because I think she killed Genesis.
In fact, Mr. Rodriguez, you even blame Casey Soto, Genesis' fiance, for not admitting Harper Martini's responsibility.
Yes, it's like she did nothing.
All right. Thanks for your time, Mr. Rodriguez. Your Honor, I pass the witness.
I see you're out of time, so I'm assuming there's no redirect.
No, Your Honor. I just ask that the witness is able to step down.
All right, the witness may step down. Is there anything further from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. The plaintiff rests its case in chief, and we just ask for a brief 5-minute recess if the defense and Your Honor is okay with that.
We'll go ahead and take that break. Please remember that this video is being publicly broadcast, so you might want to turn your cameras and audio off during the break. We'll reconvene at about 11:38. Right. Is everyone back and ready to proceed with the defense's case in chief?
The plaintiff is ready to proceed. Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, let's go ahead and proceed with your case in chief, and we'll call your first witness.
The defense calls Austin Lewis.
And you can proceed.
Good morning. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Of course. Howdy, y'all. My name is Austin Lewis. How y'all doing?
Mr. Lewis, what do you do for a living?
Well, I grow the best wine here in Midlands.
And how are you related to this case?
Oh, I've been the head winemaker at Peony Estates since 2015.
Mr. Lewis, I want to talk to you about Peony Estates. What's your job there?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm the head winemaker, so I'm in charge of making sure those grapes are perfect from vineyard to bottle. I also oversee all maintenance, little touch-ups here and there, and I also oversee all the pesticide spraying that are done around the property.
Now, Mr. Lewis, you mentioned that you oversee the pesticide sprayings at Peony Estates. How does Peony Estates deal with its bug problem?
Well, unfortunately, Peony Estates is located near something called the So Love Swamp, but to tell you the truth, ma'am, I ain't got nothing but hate for that swamp. The amount of pests and critters it's got me running around with keeps me up all night and day.
So what do you use to deal with the bug problem at Peony Estates?
Well, first we tried these fancy schmancy organic solutions, but they didn't end up working too well. They were pretty expensive and, just generally ineffective.
So after organic solutions didn't work, what did you turn to?
Well, we eventually started using a chemical pesticide. We started spraying around the foundations of the winery and the, foundations. And then in around 2018, we started using the same spray in the wine caves and the bottling areas specifically.
Now, Mr. Lewis, you mentioned using a lot of pesticide at Peony Estates. Is it legal to use that amount?
Well, of course. I mean, as long as you're following the proper safety precautions and making sure everything's done rightly, it's perfectly fine. I mean, there was this one instance where we were cited quite some time ago, but we do our best to make sure that we stay within the laws and follow all the rules.
Now, Mr. Lewis, I want to talk about a memo you sent to your employees in 2018. Would you recognize this memo if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to share my screen with Exhibit 12?
Sure.
Mr. Lewis.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm objecting to hearsay.
Let's let the document come up so I can take a look at it, and then I'll hear your objection. What is your response to the hearsay objection, counsel?
Your Honor, we are using this document for the effect that it had on the employees after Mr. Lewis sent out the memo. We don't care that Mr. Lewis typed this memo up or the facts that he's asserting in this memo. Rather, we're attempting to show the effect that it had on the employees of Peony Estates and their pesticide practices as a result of this memo, making it not hearsay at all.
What's your response, counsel?
I would argue that the truth of the matter being asserted is that Peony Estates did in fact have a pesticide problem, and that is what they are using this document to prove.
Your Honor, that is not at all what we're using this document for. We've already elicited statements about pesticide problems at Peony Estates from this witness. We're using this document to talk about the pesticide practices of the employees, as this document affected the way that the employees dealt with their pesticide problem, making it for subsequent use.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I think you can get that information without needing this document. So I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Lewis, I want to ask you a couple of questions about the chemical pesticides that you used. So after chemical pesticides didn't work at Peony Estates, you turned to other means to deal with your pest problem.
Yes, we did.
But Mr. Lewis, you knew that the finances at Peony Estates couldn't handle using different kinds of pesticide like that, right?
Yes, I mean, we had some financial difficulties at the time, so we wanted to do all of our pesticide sprayings cheaply and quickly so that, we could avoid spending any insane amounts of money making sure everyone was trained and properly done. So it was definitely a financial side of things.
Right, Mr. Lewis. And with that method in place, by spraying quickly and cheaply, as you just stated, is it possible that a wine bottle could have gotten contaminated?
Well, we do our best to make sure nothing ever happens, but I'm not there all the time, and people are forgetful. They leave stuff out, they forget to put things up, mistakes happen. And as my mom always said, nobody's perfect. We do our best, but things can happen.
So, Mr. Lewis, if a wine bottle was left out during a pesticide spraying, could you tell that the bottle became contaminated with pesticides?
No, not without actually consuming the wine.
All right, Mr. Lewis. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about your relationship with the defendant, Miss Martini. How did you first meet Harper?
Well, we met back when I was working at a different winery called the Rosie and Pedro. We both worked there at the same time, and eventually she came to me and told me about her plans for opening Peony Estates. And I decided to go ahead and work with her when she fulfilled those plans.
And what was Miss Martini like as a boss?
Oh man, Harper was great. We got along fine. She worked real hard to make sure Peony Estates was tip top, great as it could be. And she worked especially hard on the wedding between Genesis and Casey.
And from what you could tell, Mr. Lewis, what was Genesis and Miss Martini's relationship like?
I'll be honest with you, ma'am. It wasn't great. They fought a little bit back and forth all the time. And, but a part of me does understand, I certainly don't have the best relationship with my in-laws. I can understand why there would be a little bit of conflict there.
Mr. Lewis, did you ever see Miss Martini put pesticide into a bottle of wine?
Oh, no, I never saw anything like that.
Did Miss Martini ever tell you that she wanted to put pesticide in a bottle of wine?
No.
Your Honor, this question calls for hearsay.
What is your response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. We're just using this for effect it had on the listener, merely to understand Mr. Lewis's interpretation of Miss Martini's relationship with Genesis Petrillo.
What's your response?
I would argue that any statements elicited from Harper Martini about putting something in the wine are not necessarily being used for the effect on the listener, but for more prejudicial value.
What is your response to that argument?
Your Honor, this statement is not substantially more prejudicial than it is probative under Rule 403. We're simply trying to understand Mr. Lewis's interpretation of Miss Martini's relationship with Mr. Petrillo.
I'm going to sustain the objection. You can proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Mr. Lewis, Miss Martini never caused any harm to a bottle of wine that you've seen, correct?
No, I never saw her do anything with any wine bottles that that could be considered nefarious or anything. If that's what you mean.
And Mr. Lewis, Miss Martini didn't even deal with the pesticide sprayings.
No, she had knowledge of them and she knew where we kept stuff and such as that, but she didn't handle any of that. That was solely my job.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Lewis, first, good morning. I would like to start by talking a little bit more about your relationship with the defendant.
Sure.
Now, you've known the defendant for several years.
Yes.
And you would say that you two are, in fact, close friends.
Oh, yeah. No, we're good friends.
And the defendant gave you the position that you hold now at Peony Estates.
Yes, she's the one that started the winery and she invited me to become her head winemaker.
And you currently own 10% of Peony Estates, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
And you would agree that it is likely if the defendant is found liable today that Peony Estates would be shut down.
I don't know about that. I know it certainly wouldn't be good for business, but, I'm not really a business guy. I mostly just handle the vineyards.
Right, Mr. Lewis, but in that case, you would be out of a job. Is that correct?
Potentially, like I said, I don't really know about the business side of things, but, I can't imagine it would be good for business.
Now, moving on, as you said on direct, you and your team use chemical pesticides at Peony Estates.
Yes, we do.
So the defendant was obviously familiar with pesticides.
Yes, she had knowledge of them.
And the defendant was aware that these pesticides are poisonous.
Yeah, no, she had knowledge of all of that stuff.
And I would like to talk about a specific incident at Peony Estates where one of your employees did drink some contaminated wine. The defendant told you that this employee drank a little bit of this wine and then became sick, correct?
Yes, yeah, that was told to me.
In fact, this employee almost died.
Right, it was a real nasty scenario. Some careless employee left a bottle of wine out while he was spraying down the place, and got into the pesticide. The pesticide got into his wine bottle, and he went ahead and drank it and got real sick, and like you said, nearly died after.
And the defendant then told you that there was no way of knowing that this wine was contaminated.
Right, that's the real dangerous thing, I mean, like once the pesticide gets into that wine, you don't know if it's in there.
Right. The defendant even told you that you wouldn't be able to smell it.
Yeah.
So now let's move on to talking a little bit about Mr. Petrillo. You had several conversations with the defendant about Mr. Petrillo, right?
Yeah, it came up once or twice.
And you quickly became aware that the defendant did not like Mr. Petrillo.
Right, like I said earlier, I kind of understand the relationship with my in-laws ain't exactly great, so I get a little bit of animosity there.
And the defendant shared with you that they would like the wedding to be called off.
Yeah, she said that.
The defendant actually repeatedly told you how much she hated Genesis.
Yeah, she said that she didn't like him a couple times.
But the defendant did, in fact, display a hatred for Genesis.
I mean, yeah, I guess you could call it that.
And the defendant actually said that if she could make Genesis disappear, she would.
Right, yeah, she said that.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. May Mr. Lewis step down?
Yes, he may, and you may call your next witness.
The defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand.
You can proceed.
Hi, could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Blair Osborne.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I own my own company called Bliss by Blair Events. I plan weddings, birthday parties, bar mitzvahs, all the sorts.
And how are you involved in today's case?
Well, I planned the wedding of Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo. Genesis's death was a tragedy. It was terrible that the wedding had to be cancelled. I was actually there at the rehearsal dinner on June 7th, the night that Genesis got sick.
How did you end up planning this particular wedding?
Well, I planned dozens of weddings with Harper and Peony Estate, so naturally I was Harper's go-to choice to plan the wedding. I mean, have you seen this face? Of course you have. It's because I was the face of the 2016 issue of Suave for my brilliant portrayal of Farm, a farm animal theme that captures the simplicity of life in harmony with nature. It was really quite my best work.
So, Ms. Osborne, you mentioned that you've planned dozens of events with Peony Estates. Why is that?
Well, I've had a long history with Peony Estates and Harper. She actually gave my company, she saved it back when it was still a little budding business in Midlands. It has a lovely property with great views, great facilities. Unfortunately, I did have to cut ties with Peony Estates, but it was fun while it lasted.
So how was planning a wedding with Miss Martini this time?
Well, Harper wasn't really her normal self, I will say. She was much less helpful in planning this particular event, but I'll chalk that up to her having personal ties to it. But really, it just felt like Harper was being stretched way too thin.
What do you mean that Miss Martini was being stretched way too thin?
Well, there was a lot of drama at the wedding. Harper and Genesis were always arguing about different choices that had to be made, and on top of that, Harper was practically running the winery by herself.
So I want to talk about I want to talk about the wedding rehearsal. How was that for you?
Well, Harper and Genesis were still arguing about everything, but nothing seemed particularly different.
Did anything significant happen at the wedding rehearsal itself?
Well, there were a bunch of toasts being made, and I remember Harper making this one toast that was so nice and heartfelt. She gave Genesis this really beautiful bottle of wine in front of everyone at the party. It was really lovely. I shed a tear.
What happened after that?
Well, the next morning was supposed to be the morning of the wedding, but of course that didn't happen. That was when Genesis passed away. It was so sad, especially since Genesis was about to begin the rest of their life, and it was just a tragedy.
Ms. Osborne, I want to talk now about your current relationship with Peony Estates. Your Honor, may I display what has been previously marked as Exhibit 22 on the screen?
Yes.
Sorry, it's a little bit of a complicated technological feat here.
We're all still figuring out this Zoom world, so you're fine.
Just one moment, Your Honor. Ms. Osborne, can you see what I just put on the screen?
Yes, I can.
Did you make this post?
Yes, I used Canva to make this.
And Ms. Osborne, is this a true and accurate copy of the post that you put on your social media?
Yes, it is.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, it hasn't.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense offers Exhibit 22 into evidence.
Any objection, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Objection to hearsay as it's an out-of-court statement being provided in court to prove the truth of the matter asserted.
Your response? Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. This is an exception to hearsay under Rule 803.3. This is a statement of then existing mental state. This is the witness, or Ms. Osborne, describing what she planned to do in the future. As you can see, I assume we're outside of the earshot of the jury. As you can see, this says all future Bliss by Blair events previously scheduled to take place at Peony Estates Winery and B&B will be moved to alternative venues. This is a statement of plan or intent, which falls under the exception 803.3, then existing mental state.
What is your response, counsel, briefly?
Your Honor, this isn't a then existing state of mind. This is a public post on a social media platform. And therefore, I would argue it's not about the declarant, and it doesn't go to the then existing mental state of mind.
Your Honor.
It's speaking to her and her company, not herself.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Exhibit 22 is admitted.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So, excuse me, Ms. Osborne. Can you read this part of the post, Ms. Osborne?
In the wake of the tragic events on June 7th, all future Bliss by Blair events previously scheduled to take place at Peony Estates Winery and B&B will be moved to an alternative venues at no additional charge or planning fee.
Ms. Osborne, have you continued to sever ties with Peony Estates?
Yes, to be honest, I don't really have a relationship with them anymore. I decided it would be best for my company if I worked with other wineries and venues in the area. You see, I just don't want to be associated with the negative publicity.
Your Honor, at this time, I pass the witness and I'm going to stop screen sharing Exhibit 22.
All right, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Good morning, Ms. Osborne.
Good morning.
You work as a private planner in Midlands, correct?
Yes, and I'd like to say that I'm the best.
As the founder of Bliss by Blair Events?
Yes.
And that's actually how you first came into contact with the defendant?
That's correct.
An initial contact that led to a 4-year partnership between your company and Peony Estates?
Yes.
At that point, you would even consider them family?
To some extent, yes.
And in 2019, the defendant asked you to plan the wedding of Miss Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo.
Yes, she did. I was so excited because I really wanted to use the theme farm again. I feel like it would have been great for my business.
In fact, the defendant paid you a 15% higher rate to stay discreet about your involvement in the planning process, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you would agree with me in saying that the planning process for the wedding was extremely chaotic.
Oh, yes, it was chaotic. I'd literally stay up on a Tuesday night asking myself, why am I putting myself through this? But ultimately, I was so confident on my theme for the wedding.
Speaking of the planning, I want to talk a little bit about the day of the rehearsal. During the rehearsal dinner, the defendant presented Genesis with a bottle of wine, correct?
Yes, it was such a beautiful thing to watch. I had mascara on. So when I started crying, I had I had black smudges under
Taking
my
you back to my question, Miss Osborne. The defendant presented Genesis with a bottle of wine, correct?
Yes,
The defendant even told Genesis not to open up this bottle in front of other people.
that's correct.
She, in fact, said, I want this bottle to be just for you when you have a moment to reflect on everything you have done.
Yes.
Now, you would agree with me in saying you thought this last comment was pretty odd.
It was a bit odd, but nothing out of the sorts.
Now, Miss Osborne, you had never seen that bottle of wine before it was presented to Genesis.
That's correct.
And the next morning, you had learned that Genesis had passed away.
Yes, it was really a tragic event that happened.
Now, you saw Genesis drink the wine, correct?
That's correct.
But you never saw anyone else drink the wine.
No.
Now, Miss Osborne, is it true that during the planning process of the wedding, you had a meeting regarding the wedding decor?
Yes.
And is it true at this meeting you heard the defendant say, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis?
Oh, that's correct.
And is it also true that since everything that has happened, you have cut your ties with Peony Estates completely?
Yes, although Harper is a good friend of mine, I did have to cut ties with Peony Estates because it's bad for my business, so.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. May this witness be excused?
Yes, and you may call your final witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
You can proceed.
Hi, good morning. Could you tell us all who you are?
Of course, my name is Harper Martini.
Ms. Martini, we've heard about this a lot throughout trial, so I have to ask. Did you poison Genesis Petrillo?
No, of course not. Hurting my baby's fiance would be like hurting my own baby. I would never do that.
All right, I actually want to take a step back and talk about your business, Peony Estates. How did you start it?
Of course. When I was little in Puerto Rico, my parents always wanted to open a winery. So they moved to California and opened their own winery. And mommy and papi always wanted to bring the flavors of the tropic to the West Coast. And that's exactly what they did. So when I grew up, I wanted to do the same. I opened my winery in Midlands, Peony Estates.
How was your business doing before all this happened?
Super. I was having the time of my life. I had concentrated small batches of vino and they were high quality. I was always trying to bring flavors like sangria, mojito. It was delicioso. I consider myself the J-Lo of wine, post Mark Anthony. But after everything that happened, it hasn't been the same.
I actually want to talk about what happened to Mr. Petrillo a little bit later, but first, how did you feel about his and your daughter's relationship?
Look, I didn't like Genesis Petrillo. He was a little crazy, and I didn't like him. He wasn't a good influence on my baby.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he was a heavy drinker, and look, I'm known to get a little wild myself, but he would call me and leave mean voicemails while he was drunk. And if he wasn't part of my family, he would have been disowned. But Casey, she always told me, turn the other cheek, do it for me. And I always did it for her.
How did you go about trying to turn the other cheek?
Well, I took him salsa dancing once. And it was the most stressful situation of my entire life. My feet hurt. It was a disaster. And after that, I decided, you know what? I'm going to do it a little bit easier. I'm going to give him a wedding gift.
I actually want to talk about the night of the dinner rehearsal, but before we get into the gifts, what was it like?
It was so stressful. I was trying to make sure that everything was perfect. Genesis got in a little late, so that was also stressful. Everything was a little stressful. I felt like the bride myself. But after a while, I calmed down, I sat down and I gave gifts.
What gifts were you giving out?
Well, I had decided that everyone should receive, a bottle of wine. So everyone got the bottle of Horizon wine, except Genesis. I gave him a bottle of Gara wine.
Miss Martini, is there any chance you could tell us about what time you gave Genesis that wine?
It had to have been around 9 or 10 p.m. It couldn't have been later than that.
All right, I actually want to take a step back. Now, we've heard a lot that you may have poisoned that bottle of wine the very same day as the dinner rehearsal. Would that have been possible?
No. The winemaking process is extremely long. I had those bottles ready a month prior.
Ms. Martini, I'm no winemaker. Could you walk me through that process a little bit?
Aye, of course. Very simple. So you take the bottle and you decant it from the aging cask, right? After you do that, you cork the bottle and then you take a heating filament and you seal the bottle. And at that point, it's tamper-proof.
Okay, let's say I were to just use the same wine that was already in the bottle. Would I have been able to do it then?
No. It takes a long, we have a machine that corks the bottles and they're industrial style. So they take 100 bottles all the time. And while they're efficient, they're not fast. So it takes a long time.
But let's say I tried to do it anyways. Is there any way I could have avoided being noticed at your winery?
I don't think so personally. This is why. The corking machine is in the kitchen and the other machinery is in the bottling area and they're all right next to each other. Sometimes when the other employees are using it, I can hear it from the dining room.
Ms. Martini, would you recognize a map of Peony Estates so you could show us where you're talking about?
Of course. All
right, let's get previously entered exhibit 4 on the screen real quick. All right, Ms. Martini, is this a diagram of your winery?
It is. Mm-hmm.
All right, could you describe to us exactly where this machinery was in relation to the dining room on this map?
Of course. So it's at the top right. At the top right, you see that box and it has kitchen, tasting room, bottling area, dining room, all that is right there.
Okay, let's get a red circle circling that top right square real quick. Now, Ms. Martini, does that red circle accurately reflect what you were talking about just a second ago?
See, that's correct.
All right, great. Now let's take down exhibit 4. I want to go back to the dinner rehearsal. What happened after you had finished giving out your gifts?
Well, I had a good time. Finally got to settle down a little bit, dance a little bit, and then I went to sleep, get my beauty sleep. And then around early in the morning, I got a phone call.
What was that phone call about?
That someone was in the hospital. I didn't know who it was. I thought maybe someone got a little too drunk. I didn't know. I just hoped that they were okay.
I want to talk about the next morning. What happened?
The next morning, I found out that Genesis Petrillo had passed away. And we had to cancel the wedding. It was a disaster.
Miss Martini, has anything good at all come out of this for you?
No, I'm a mother. Another mother lost their child. No mother ever wants that. I lost my business. It hasn't been the same. And my child hasn't talked to me in over a year. I lost everything.
Thank you, Miss Martini. Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mrs. Martini. Now, your only child is Casey Soto, correct?
That's correct. That's my pride and joy, mi mariposita.
Now, Miss Martini, you also run your own winery, Peony Estates.
That's correct.
And you had hoped that Casey would eventually run this winery.
Yes, this is my legacy, and I wanted to leave it to her like my parents left me their legacy.
But all of this changed when Mr. Petrillo stepped into the picture.
Yes, she seemed a little less interested, but I thought I could convince her at some point.
And you even said that you believed your and Casey's business would be better off if Genesis were somehow out of the picture.
I didn't like Genesis. I thought as a family we would be better if he would just leave us alone. I didn't like him.
Now, Mrs. Martini, I want to talk about Mr. Petrillo and Miss Soto's wedding. So they had originally planned to house this wedding at the Rosie and Pedro's winery.
That's correct. And then I convinced my darling to have it at Peonia Estates where it deserved to be, where I could make sure everything was perfect.
Yes, Mrs. Martini, but they did originally want to have this at the Rosie and Pedro's, correct?
Yes, of course, of course.
And after you had convinced them to move it to Peony Estates, you hired a wedding planner all by yourself and just wanted her to plan the entire wedding without consulting the two getting married, correct?
Yes, I wanted the first half of it to be a surprise so that they knew that I had taken care of all the expenses, everything that they needed off their shoulders.
Now, Mrs. Martini, at one point in time, you found out that Mr. Petrillo and Miss Soto planned to move to France.
Yes, I did. I did find out that they were planning on leaving.
And this made you upset, correct?
It made me sad. Of course, I was upset. I wanted my Casey here.
And you even said after hearing about this plan that you exploded at Genesis, correct?
I was a little upset because when I found out, he had sent me a voicemail insulting me, telling me that I would never spend anything. I was upset.
Mrs. Martini, redirecting you back to my question, you would say that you exploded at Genesis, correct?
Yes, because he left it in a very rude voicemail.
Now, Miss Martini, you called Genesis afterwards and said that there was nothing you wouldn't do to protect Casey.
Yeah, of course, like a mother would.
And you would say that with Genesis around, you were even worried that your relationship with Casey wouldn't last much longer.
Yes, I thought it was becoming a little strained, but I always tried as much as I could.
Now, Ms. Martini, I want to talk a little bit more about the night of the wedding rehearsal. Genesis showed up late to the wedding rehearsal, correct?
He did. Mm-hmm.
And this upset you.
Oh, yes, of course. It's the dinner rehearsal. Everyone has to be on time, so everything goes smoothly.
And you would say that in this moment, you wanted nothing more than for Genesis to be gone, correct?
At that moment, I wanted him to be gone, pero I knew that the wedding was coming, so I just accepted it.
Later that evening, you ran into Angel Rodriguez while holding a canister of pesticides, correct?
I don't recall, but I know I was holding a canister of pesticide at some point. We had to deal with some roaches.
And when Mr. Rodriguez asked what was going on, you said, it's for Genesis.
I didn't say that.
All right. Well, later that evening, you gifted Genesis a bottle of Cara wine, correct?
That's correct.
While you gifted everyone else bottles of Horizon wine.
Mm-hmm. That's correct also.
Now, you left the dinner rehearsal around 10:30 p.m.
Yes, that's exactly when I left.
And you mentioned in your direct that around 2:30 a.m. you received a call.
Yes, in the morning that someone had been in the hospital.
And this call was from an employee, like you said, saying someone had been rushed to the hospital.
Right.
And you just assumed that it was Mr. Petrillo?
No, I didn't know who it was.
But after receiving this call, you went to Mr. Petrillo's room, correct?
I did. I went to check if everyone was okay, and the room, there was no one in the room.
And when you entered the room, you saw the empty bottle of wine on the floor, correct?
I did, and it was, just thrown. So I threw it away.
Yes, but before you threw it away, you ripped the label off the bottle and then proceeded to throw it away, correct?
I did. I ripped the label off and I threw the bottle away.
Now, Miss Martini, do you recall writing a note to Genesis Petrillo at one point in time?
I do.
Would you recognize this note if I were to show it to you in court today?
Yes, I was a little drunk when I wrote it and I was a little dramatic, but I remember it.
Your Honor, permission to show opposing counsel what has been previously marked as Exhibit 24. And permission to show the witness.
Yes.
Ms. Wassell, could you please display Exhibit 24 on the screen?
Yes, one moment.
Now, Mrs. Martini, what have I just shown you?
You're showing me the note I wrote to Genesis while I was drunk and watching a telenovela. Ay, Dios.
Is this a fair and accurate copy of the note?
Yes, it is.
Does it appear to have been altered in any way since you last saw it?
No, I don't think so.
Your Honor, plaintiff now enters Exhibit 24 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 24 is admitted.
Now, Mrs. Martini, here in the note, it says that you offered Mr. Petrillo $300,000 to leave Casey.
Yes, it's exactly what they had done in the telenovela. And in that moment, I was like, this is going to get him to leave. So that's what I did.
Or otherwise, you threatened to take Mr. Petrillo out the hard way.
Yes, I copied it from a line from the telenovela.
Yes. Ms. Wassell, you can stop sharing the exhibit. Thank you. Now, Mrs. Martini, you knew at this time that if pesticides were mixed with wine, they could not be detected.
Oh, yes, of course. I knew, you have to learn all of these things for the winery.
And you explained that you were relieved or even happy that Genesis was no longer in your life.
Well, I was relieved that I didn't have to deal with it, but I'm so much more upset that I lost my Casey.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
No redirect, Your Honor. May Ms. Martini step down?
Yes. Is there anything else from the defense?
No, Your Honor. With that, the defense rests its case in chief, and we'd ask for a brief 5 to 10 minute recess before we move into closing arguments.
That sounds good to me. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 12:20.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, everyone, it is 12:20. Are the parties ready to proceed with closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, plaintiff's counsel, you may proceed with your closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Genesis Petrillo was a great man. You got to hear from those who loved him today that he was a loyal friend and a loving fiance. And everyone who knew Genesis and Casey could see the way they loved each other. They could see their excitement for their coming wedding, for what life was going to hold for them as newlyweds, their excitement for getting ready to start the adventure of a lifetime, moving to France, taking on a new part of the world together as new life partners. Everyone could see this. Everyone except for the defendant, because the defendant chose to see Genesis as a threat to not just her ability to control her own life, but the life of her daughter, Casey. While the couple tried to plan the wedding that they wanted, the defendant resisted. And she told anybody who would listen just how much she hated Genesis and what she would do to get rid of him if she could. The defendant decided, despite her daughter's clear love for Genesis Petrillo, that he wasn't the right match. And she made sure to get him out of their lives. She tried to bribe Genesis, as if there's any amount of money that can separate two people who are truly in love. And this isn't some joke that can be laughed off as coming from a TV show. No, this was $300,000 of the defendant's own money. She was willing to give it up, but this clearly didn't work. So she resorted to harm. The defendant used pesticides to poison a bottle of Cara wine, which she gifted to Genesis Petrillo on the night of the couple's rehearsal dinner. And the following morning, when Genesis and Casey were supposed to be making their lifelong commitment to each other, Genesis died of pesticide poisoning. The defendant was intentional, she was angry, and she finally found a way to gain control. Now, today, our burden as the plaintiff was to prove the elements of battery to you by a preponderance of the evidence. We needed to prove that it was more likely than not that the defendant is liable for battery. And we did this. We proved that there was an act, that the defendant poisoned that bottle of wine. She was seen carrying a pesticide bottle around on the night of the rehearsal dinner, saying it was for Genesis. And we proved that she had the intention to harm Genesis. And the act that she committed did in fact cause harm. Genesis Petrillo died as a result of ingesting that poisoned wine. Now, you heard today from the testimonies of Angel Rodriguez and Casey Soto, and they both told you just how much the defendant hated Genesis. She wanted her out of her life. Casey told the court that her mother constantly fought with Genesis, despite telling her again and again that Genesis was right for her. She made her love crystal clear, and it did not matter. Angel Rodriguez told you that the defendant was constantly seeking control during the wedding planning process, a wedding that wasn't even her own. But she couldn't stop the wedding from going through. So, having developed intent, she turned to harm. And Mr. Rodriguez also told you that he himself saw the defendant carrying pesticides on the night of the rehearsal dinner, joking that, oh, it's for Genesis. It wasn't a joke, members of the jury, as we have seen. An innocent life was lost. It's not a joke. And Dr. Kwan confirmed this cause of death for you. The defense did not bring an expert because these facts are undisputed. The wine given by Harper Martini caused Mr. Petrillo's death. The defendant toasted Genesis, watched as he took the bottle into his hands, knowing it would cause harm and intending it to cause harm. And just the next morning, when Angel Rodriguez had to rush back to Peony Estates to tell Casey that her husband was dying, the defendant already knew that it was Mr. Petrillo in that hospital bed, that it was Mr. Petrillo who had been poisoned before Mr. Rodriguez ever had the chance to open his mouth. Now, in a few moments, the defense will come before you, and they're going to tell you that we did not reach our burden today because they have told you a very different story. A story about a mother who wanted the best for her child, about how this was some sort of accident. But none of these theories hold up under the facts. Members of the jury, if this was an accident, if Peonia Estates had a dangerous problem with their pesticide usage, that would lead to an accident like this, then why would there only be one contaminated bottle of wine? Why would only one individual poison that night? And not just among the members of the wedding party who were there that night, there's not a single customer of Peonia Estates who had been poisoned. This does not hold up. The only person who was harmed, who was poisoned, was somebody that the defendant explicitly hated and told everybody that she would do whatever she could to get him out of their lives. This is not the behavior of a typical mother-in-law. This is the behavior of somebody who would resort to harm and who did resort to harm. The defense told you that she had nothing to gain and everything to lose. But in fact, she had everything to lose from this wedding. She would lose her daughter. She was intentional, she was angry, and she was finally in control. Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, you can proceed with your closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Harper Martini had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Ladies and gentlemen, the plaintiff has been trying to tell you a very specific story all trial. And you know, from the way opposing counsel just got up and reset it, I almost want to believe it myself. It has secrets, intrigue, betrayal. It was like one of those hour and 45-minute dramas you see on TV. But ladies and gentlemen, that's the problem. This isn't TV. This is real life. And in real life, you need more than mean words, out of context quotes, and a smidge of circumstantial evidence. You need facts. And the fact is, there was no evidence that could prove Harper Martini killed anyone. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something crystal clear. The defense has absolutely no burden in today's case. I didn't have to stand up and talk to you. Miss Martini didn't have to take the stand. In fact, after Mr. Rodriguez was done with his testimony, we could have asked you for a verdict. But we didn't. Because Miss Martini wants to tell you all what really happened. She wants you to know the truth. And ladies and gentlemen, by now we all know what the truth is. Truth is that Harper Martini was a loving mother who only wanted the best for her daughter, Casey. Now, no one here is under the illusion that Mr. Petrillo and Miss Martini got along. They didn't. Miss Martini herself told you that, but you heard that she was trying to make peace, that she had a custom bottle of wine for Mr. Petrillo. She gave Mr. Petrillo that wine in front of every single person that was going to attend the wedding. We know that that wine may have had some pesticide in it, but it wasn't Miss Martini who put them there. You heard from Austin Lewis, the head winemaker at Peonia Estates, that they were operating on razor-thin margins, that they had to do pesticide spraying as fast and cheaply as possible because you heard that Peonia Estates had a big pest problem and they had to use a lot of pesticide to deal with it. Now, we don't know exactly how the pesticide got into that bottle of wine. Maybe the grapes were contaminated when they sprayed them. Maybe there was a bottle of wine left out near some pesticides. Maybe before the wine was ever bottled, someone was spraying near empty bottles of wine that were later filled with wine. We don't know. I want you to hear this when I tell you. We don't have to. It was the plaintiff's job to prove how that wine got contaminated with pesticide. Now, that's not the only thing they had to prove. They had to prove three very specific things to you by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not. The first thing they had to do was to prove that Miss Martini wanted to hurt Genesis. They also had to prove that Miss Martini took specific actions with the intent for those actions to cause Genesis Petrillo harm. And they also had to prove that the harm that Genesis Petrillo suffered was a result of Harper Martini's specific actions. Let's talk about what they showed you to try and prove that. The first person they called to the stand was Casey Soto. Let's think back and think about what she told us. Now, she told us that Harper and Genesis didn't get along. She said that her mother was involved with planning her wedding, and that's about it. Casey Soto couldn't tell us that Harper wanted Genesis to be hurt. She didn't tell us that she ever saw Miss Martini poisoning a bottle of wine. She couldn't tell us exactly how Mr. Petrillo died. That's when we heard from Dr. Kwan. And all Dr. Kwan could tell us was that Genesis Petrillo probably died from pesticide poisoning. Do you know what? We agree. Dr. Kwan also told you that any business using pesticide presents a danger to their customers. Then we heard from Angel Rodriguez, Genesis's best friend. And he told you again that Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo didn't get along. And then he mentioned some other things, but I actually wrote one thing down that he said, something that really caught my ear. Mr. Rodriguez said on cross-examination, "I think Harper killed Genesis Petrillo." Angel Rodriguez told you all exactly what he was trying to do in trial. He couldn't prove that Harper Martini wanted Genesis to be hurt. He couldn't prove that Harper Martini ever poisoned a bottle of wine. He couldn't prove how Genesis Petrillo's harm was a result of Harper Martini's actions. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about what the plaintiff wants you to believe. They want you to believe that Harper Martini is a cold-blooded killer that was willing to sacrifice her business, her relationship with her only child, and her reputation, all to stop a wedding. Ladies and gentlemen, they had to prove that to you by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning that their story has to be more likely than all other possible scenarios combined. They want you to believe that Harper Martini poisoned that bottle of wine on June 6th of 2019, but no one saw her do it, no one heard her do it, and no one can prove it happened. Ladies and gentlemen, it's natural that when a tragedy occurs, we want someone to blame. We want someone to be held responsible, but sometimes a tragedy is just a tragedy. No one wanted this to happen. There was no plot. In just a moment, you're going to go back to that jury deliberation room and you're going to have the power to decide this case. The judge can't do it. No matter how much I want to, I can't decide the outcome of this case. All I can do is get up here and talk to you all, take you through the evidence, and hope that when you go back there and you really look at what happened, you'll see that Harper Martini had everything to lose and has gained absolutely nothing. Find the defendant, Miss Martini, not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Plaintiff, any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
You can proceed.
Members of the jury, your verdict today depends on what is more likely. And I ask you just that. Is it more likely that Genesis Petrillo was the only person to ingest pesticides that night that the defendant was carrying around? That only the bottle that Mr. Petrillo consumed had been contaminated? That the rampant pesticide usage happening at Peony Estates only contaminated a single bottle, only caused harm to a single person? Is that more likely? Or is it more likely that the defendant, who we have proved was angry and had intent, poisoned that bottle and gifted it to Mr. Petrillo as a last resort to gain control back over her life and the life of her daughter? Who held the wine that night? It was the defendant and it was Mr. Petrillo. And we cannot confirm that it had not been tampered with before it was given or while it was being given. Now, the defendant was willing to give up $300,000 of her own money to get rid of Mr. Petrillo. And that makes it seem very likely that she would be willing to take it even a step further. Harm. The defense told you that our story today is filled with secrets and intrigue, but we did not tell you a story. No, the facts were laid out for you. And the facts show what happened. This is not some movie trailer. An innocent life was lost. And for this reason, you must find the defendant liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. The case is submitted to the jury. We're going to now go and finish submitting our ballots. If y'all could just stay on until we've got the ballots submitted, and then we'll do some comments after we've gotten confirmation that they have been accepted and everything looks good. And to my scoring judges, if y'all could just type me a little note letting me know when you've submitted your ballot so I can confirm that with the tab room. But for right now, just take a quick break. Okay. I've gotten confirmation that our ballots have been submitted and they are good to go. So we'll go ahead and do a bit of time for feedback. What I'm going to do is introduce myself, let my other judges introduce themselves. I'll let them give feedback first because you've gotten to hear from me for the past 2 hours. So I will let you hear from them before I give any feedback I've got. My name is Allison Rapond. I am an attorney here in Dallas, Texas. I say here, even though we're all in our respective places. I went to Baylor Law School for my legal education. I've been practicing law for 7 years now, and I do just kind of general civil defense litigation. A lot of my cases are in kind of the personal injury products liability realm, represent a lot of bars and restaurants and places like that. So some of the BAC conversations that y'all have had throughout this case are things I'm very familiar with. I also am very involved in Texas high school mock trial. I help run that competition every year. So if you competed there, you might have seen me before there. And then I do coach a team at SMU Law School as well. So super involved in mock trial, did it in law school. I love it because I think it is so helpful for y'all, whether you plan to go to law school or not. But if any of you do have ambitions of going to law school, you would all be very well suited. And this is a great step in the right direction to give you a leg up there. And so now I'll turn it over to my co-judges, and then I'll have them give y'all feedback first. But this is a great round. Really enjoyed it. A great way to kind of cap off this competition.
Hi, y'all. I'm Madeline Falone. So just a quick introduction. I'm a 3L at Baylor Law School. I currently intern for the VA and for a major law firm. Most of what I do is general business litigation. I also do a lot of IP work. This is a great round. I have a lot of experience with debate, mock trial, moot court. I can tell that all of y'all are very experienced and have been practicing quite a bit. So great job for truly all of you. I know that we're a little short on time, so I'm going to go through some of the big picture stuff that I noticed that probably would be best to work on rather than just individual nitpicky stuff. So just to start off, a direct examination really ought to be conversational. That's something that you're going to be, practicing with your witnesses, so you can really tailor questions to what you know the witness is going to answer. And that really helps to build some credibility, build a little bit of rapport with the witness, and especially in a jury trial or probably even a bench trial, that kind of rapport and credibility is really useful. So definitely use the direct examination to your advantage in that way, and get the jury to like your witness based, from that. Also, just kind of a thing that I noticed a couple times through the round for witnesses in this format, really, in mock trial, I mean, when you hear an objection called and the judge overruled the objection awaiting witness testimony, which is done several times in this round, maybe consider how to rephrase your answer so that the objection isn't sustained later, because the sustained objection is hurting your if you're the plaintiff side witness, it's hurting the plaintiff, etc. So listen to the objection and try to fix your answer. Usually it's pretty easy to do that, especially there's a lot of hearsay objections. Just don't try to quote, loose quote or paraphrase the person, and then you won't get a hearsay objection. So that's just something to keep in mind. Also, I wrote a little Word document. Some of you, mainly for cross-examination, less so for direct, would ask a question, but it seemed a lot more like a statement. Try to use a bit of a higher inflection, because sometimes I recognize the tendency to say, sort of, and you were there that night and you saw this. I recognize that tendency and it's fine, but sometimes it can make things a bit choppy. So perhaps sometimes either ask with more of a leading inflection, or say, is it true? Isn't that right? Or something to indicate more so that it's a question. That just helps with flow. One other thing, this is more so for the defense, but really it'll be useful for for you in any time, you got to step away from the case that's in front of you and to some degree to the side that you're representing, and really see who's the bad guy here. Like who is the jury immediately going to not like? And in this case, for the defense, the jury's immediately not going to like your client. Either way you spin it, she is kind of a spiteful future mother-in-law. She doesn't like this person. There's no evidence that Genesis Petrillo was like a bad person. The jury's not going to like your client. It's okay to acquiesce to the weaknesses of your case. And it's okay to kind of say, yeah, she's, not the best mother-in-law, but that doesn't make her liable for what she's being accused of. That's a great way to build credibility. It's not particularly helpful to actually say, there's only, a smidge of circumstantial evidence, there's no proof, etc. I understand the tendency again, but it's okay to acquiesce and say, basically, I know my client's kind of a jerk, but it's not illegal to be a jerk. I did that plenty of times and it's always worked out. But overall, that was just kind of a bit of a point for whatever side you end up doing. Just look at the case and find the weakness. And if it's your weakness, address it. It's the elephant in the room. And then finally, this mainly has to do with witnesses. Be sure to take on the right tone, even if you're playing a character. Playing a character is kind of idiosyncratic in the first place. Some people don't like that. I tend to not really like that. But even if you are going to play a character, take on the right tone. This is a case, obviously it's a civil case, but somebody died, supposedly from being poisoned. So we want to make sure that, So we want to make sure that that we take on that right tone, and not play up, that this was a joke or that it's kind of informal. We don't want to come off as flippant, so that's always something to keep in mind. Remember that this is a court proceeding, and it is serious. So oh, and then just one more thing. I know I'm taking forever, but just one more thing. On a CX particularly, don't back down when you're hot on the trail of a question that you're asking, and you're really kind of about to nail this point. Don't just give it up right there. It happened, I recall, with Ms. Peterson during a cross-examination. You were talking about, it was a question about like careless spraying of pesticides around like open bottles of wine. That could have bolstered the plaintiff's argument that Harper Martini knew to a substantial certainty that the pesticides had contaminated the bottle of wine. That's enough to establish intent. So you don't want to back down on a CX when you're like right there, about to get an admission that would really help your case. But overall, like I said, great job for everybody. I can tell there's a lot of preparation and experience in this room, and I hope y'all continue on.
This is Shane Koshman. I have a couple of comments. I don't know if my video is working or not.
We don't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. So I've been practicing over 30 years. I do complex corporate litigation. And first thing I could say is what a spectacular performance by all of you. I'm in court often, and I have seen substantially lesser performances by practicing attorneys. I'm not going to address the differences between a mock scenario and an actual trial, because I don't think that's the purpose of this. The advocacy skills are what I think are important, and I'm just going to make 4 comments in regard to that. First thing is, watch preachers on television and watch how they actually preach to an audience. Don't say things like talk to, speak to. Always bring in the audience. Always say things like, visit with me. Please take a look with me when you're dealing with exhibits. Bring the audience into what you're doing. Make them feel like they're part of your team, and that they're actually, that what you're doing is you're working with them, not speaking to them, not telling them to look at anything. Bring them in. Please take a look at this with me. Let's visit about this together. Make them feel like they're part of your team. The second thing is, I did like the use of thematics. You will find that thematics are going to be the sine qua non of whatever you do in a trial. You have to have that thematic from the beginning, and I think certain team members did well with that. But you need to weave it in all the time. You have to leave them with something that they could remember very simply in a sentence. You only get an elevator pitch. It's just like interviewing for a job. Assume that you're going to be in that elevator for about 30 seconds to a minute and give the whole presentation, assuming that's the only thing they're going to remember. The third thing is hammock bad arguments. Use hammocking to basically lessen arguments that are bad for you. In other words, give your argument, then address the arguments against you. Do not, especially as a plaintiff, wait for them to raise those arguments against you. Give your case, address the bad facts against you, and then give your case again. It's like a hammock. Hammock it in between, so that right after you address their points, even if some of them are not your best points, you end off with making arguments in support of yourself. Don't address theirs at the end. Don't address theirs at the beginning. Hammock them into the middle so that it's recency. That's what people remember, recency. And then a real simple thing that just takes time is ums and ers and ahas and things like that are not transitional phrases. Those are hiccups that are done because you're not exactly knowing what you want to say next, or you just want an opportunity to take a breath. Just take a breath. Don't do things like that because it takes down on your advocacy skills. Other than that, I thought it was a spectacular job in terms of everyone involved. And I thoroughly agree with everything Madeline said on the other points, which are insightful and I thought really made sense. That's it.
And I'll just add a couple of little comments. I don't have too much more to add because I do think, along with my fellow judges, y'all did a fantastic job this round. Very enjoyable. I want to talk about themes for a second. I think that you want to make sure your theme of the case is as unflippable as possible. And that's the problem I have with the defense theme in particular, is I think it is a little bit easy to flip. And I felt that way about the defense themes I've seen for the most part in this competition, because you say she has nothing to lose, but that's hindsight's a 2020 thing. Like, I imagine that if this was an intentional plan, Harper Martini thought she wasn't going to get caught, and so didn't think she would lose her daughter. The thing she was focused on was, this person's about to take my daughter away. And so that's something I think on the plaintiff side, I think you did it a little bit, but that's what I would have tried to draw on even more in your closing and your rebuttal, is that it's, at the time, the only thing that Harper Martini thought that she was going to lose is her daughter. And so that's why this happened. But I will compliment y'all. I've seen this 4 times now because I always get pulled into judging more often than I would like. I think your theory of the case is probably one of the most effective ones I've seen, because I do like leading into the idea that this was an accident. Like, if it was because of the pesticides in the bottle, it wasn't on purpose. It was because of an accident. And so I think that is a good theory to run with, and something to think about also on the plaintiff side, is making sure that your theory is one that makes a lot of sense on the defense side. But I thought that both sides did great presentations overall. I think you all have a good grasp of the rules of evidence for college students. I think the witnesses all stayed in character very well, so I'll compliment that. One thing I'll echo that Madeline said is if you're playing, particularly if you're playing a witness who is supposed to have known the decedent in this case, you've got to show some degree of emotion when you're talking about the death. Even if you are the defendant who hated this person, you've got to sound sad when you're talking about the fact that someone has died. I know we're dealing with a hypothetical death, but someone is dead. That's a great point. And so I think that one thing I'll commend plaintiff's counsel on doing is you did a great job establishing who Genesis Petrillo is and why we should care that this person is dead. That's what you want to do. And I think you did it very well. Defense, you might want to, I think you did a good job trying to personalize your client too. You might want to do that even more because you want to show that your client is a person with feelings, has lost their daughter out of this. And so I think that you might want to amp that up a little bit too, because in real life, juries relate to people and they're more likely to relate to the person you represent than to you as the attorney. And so as much as you can do to build up the person you represent, if you take the other side of the case where you're representing the company, you'll still do the same thing. You will build up the company through Harper Martini and say, this is a family-owned business, go through all of that. But you want the jury to like and relate to your client to the greatest extent they can. And so y'all did that to some extent. Perhaps for regionals, think about ways to amp that up even more. Like I said, overall, I don't have a ton negative to say. I'm going to submit some comments for you to review, but you should all be very proud of your presentations today. And I think you're going to do very well when you compete in your regional competitions. So thank you all so much.
Oh, if we have a moment, I would make, I didn't realize you all are going to go back to another competition, but if you are, I realize that there's a little bit of a schism in your actual scenario because you could have chosen to deal with negligence per se. So perhaps you're trying to stave off just because you might get it confused in your own head on what it is. But whenever you have a cause of action that deals with intent, you need to hone in on that issue and make it crystal clear that that is one of the major issues. And what I mean by that specifically is I would just suggest that if you're doing this again and you have something like that in your scenario, that you make crystal clear something to the effect of, ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about negligence. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about somebody who violated some standards, someone who necessarily should have done something and didn't, somebody who was careless. We're not even talking about someone who was reckless. We're talking about someone who intended to harm someone else. Intent. And there's not one speck of evidence in this case that there was actual intent to cause this harm at issue. Actual intent. And that might be just something to also focus on because intent is a high standard. That is a high standard. And that when you do it again, if you do it again, that might be something to really take into consideration. That's it.
Sorry, go ahead. I agree with that 100% because intent really, especially in a civil case, that's one of the highest bars you are going to have to meet. And so I think that is great feedback for y'all on the defense and something to think about when you're on the plaintiff side. If this is the theory of the case you're presenting, you do have to provide a ton of evidence to show that this was an intentional act. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't, we're spraying pesticides in the room, but oh well, who cares? It has to be something more than that. But yeah, I think that is a great tip.
One thing on the plaintiff side, I'm sorry, this is my last one, I promise, but on the plaintiff side, it was Lauren made a spectacular argument, but it almost in passing, it wasn't highlighted by intonation or the passionateness of the statement, but you made the argument that, look, nobody else got poisoned. And the thing that the thing that resonated in my mind is I didn't remember anybody giving any evidence that any of the other folks that got bottles of wine, those same bottles of wine came out of the same vineyard, came out of the same batch, and they saw other people drinking that wine. They didn't see other people drinking that wine, but that to me is a potential clincher. I mean, if you would have put on evidence that said this all came from the same batch, it was given to everybody in that room, and we saw 6 people literally chug down their bottles and go dancing. That's a powerful argument. Now, there wasn't evidence that I saw in the plaintiff's case or the defendant's case that led on to that, but boy, that would be pretty, at least for me as a juror, that would be a powerful factual argument.
Oh, I just wanted to say really quick. Well, this is actually kind of a question. Y'all can nod. You don't have to unmute. Is it the case that plaintiff was able to choose their cause of action, battery or negligence per se? Okay. Yeah. If you're going to continue competing, there's no issue with battery. I do think that intent is certainly a high burden to meet, but I think you could do it, artfully. But perhaps if you can choose, I haven't seen I've judged 3, perhaps 4 rounds. I think it might have just been 3. Everyone's done battery, so I don't know if that's a thing. Look into negligence. Negligence, I mean, personally, I would probably go with the negligence argument. But everyone seems to be shying away from that. But it looks like there's a lot more proof. Mainly the flip side, the harder part to the negligence argument is finding a duty, that there was like an affirmative duty to actually, prevent pesticide usage in this way, or to not be spraying carelessly or whatever. But if you do go on to compete with this topic, I would look into that other cause of action if you haven't already, particularly, and see if you can draw a better case with that. But that's nothing against plaintiff's case. Like, I think battery's fine. I just wanted to say that.
Negligence is a killer argument. That's a negligence per se is a great plaintiff's argument under these. I agree with you, Madeline. Great plaintiff's case here for negligence per se. Really.
The cautionary tale I will give you if you go that route is I saw a plaintiff's case trying to establish negligence per se, and they presented no evidence of the cause of death of Genesis Petrillo. And they also presented no witness to talk about who Genesis Petrillo was. So if you look into that, make sure that you still have witnesses or a witness to establish those couple of issues. Because that was my big complaint about the one plaintiff's negligence case I saw, is that you're going to have to likely call the doctor still, for example, in my opinion, to establish cause of death. And you're going to need to have some witness that's available to personalize the plaintiff. That's the only tip I will give y'all from having seen a negligence case. Most of what I saw was battery as well, but I did see one negligence case. I don't disagree with the recommendation to go that route because it's a little bit easier to prove if you look in and decide that you want to maybe switch strategies. Just make sure you still have that aspect of the case as well. And that's the only caveat I'll give.
Was there an industry expert allowed here? Because did you guys have an industry expert? Oh, all right. So they'd be solely relying on the statute.
There's a health inspector and there's a journalist. There's a couple of witnesses that talk to violations of certain codes. So there are witnesses to testify to that. It's just the presentation I saw, it truly was just like, it was the journalist, it was the health inspector, and I think it was the owner of a competing winery. And those were the witnesses I saw. And so there are witnesses available to prove that. I wouldn't say that any of them are experts per se, but there are witnesses to prove that aspect of the case too.
Right. Then it's an easy peasy in terms of who your plaintiff's case witnesses are going to be, because you got to have Quan and you have to have the health inspector, because that's the only person that's going to have the foundation to be able to opine on the violations. And then it's just a matter of picking who that primary witness is going to be besides those two, which are basically going to be expert witnesses. It's fun. This stuff, all of you, somebody said, I don't know if you're going to go to law school, what a absolute waste of incredible amounts of talent. if all of you don't go to law school, but this stuff is a blast. This is what every litigator wants to do. Every single one. And I'm not saying that you don't go through document productions for a year and you don't do memos. My own son is going to law school right now, and that's how I ever heard about mock trials, is because he was in mock trials, and I watched every one of them. But man, if you don't dig this, don't be a litigator. But this is what it's about. This is where it's fun. I mean, really fun. So anyway, all right, I've talked enough. Are we done?
I think so. I'm going to let y'all go. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, what little you have left. And good luck with the rest of your semesters. Good luck with your regional competitions when you compete. And just well done.
Thanks y'all so much for taking the time to judge. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for your